This time on Jester's Garage, we're going to do a little bit of the backstory on this old truck right here. My high school hot rod. 46 Chevy truck. Between the years of 1987 and 1994 when I butchered it. You may notice that this cab here doesn't look like it's been butchered. That's because my 46 that I butchered and butchered and butchered and butchered until it was about 47 inches tall at the top of the windshield. It's in the other shop. This here is kind of the same truck. That's why I say it's a tale of two 46s. I've taken my original high school rig and I butchered it so much. It's all Corvette drivetrain. It's less than 4 feet tall at the top of the windshield. It is distinctively 46, but is distinctively changed in every shape and fashion. The Jester that I built, I could have built that thing out of sheet metal. I could have built that just without butchering this girl. I still have my dreams of this crazy, crazy roadster truck that I cut my 46 into. So I've got two of them. The story today has to do with that moment of time when I finally was able to work on my truck a couple different times. A little bit in '89 and a little bit in the mid-'90s. I drove this truck in high school from '77 all the way through about '83. And I rotted the piss out of this thing. Summer, winter, 7 days a week. It was relentless. The problem with that is I had no downtime. I had wheel hop, steering issues, shifting issues. I had a crack in the frame. The kingpins were junk, the shackles were junk, the steering was junk. It was out here in front. It was a stock frame with rivets, and the thing was so freaking loose, and it was the most dangerous thing in the world. My first V8 conversion, 1980, was the most redneck thing you'll ever see. I took the crossmember from a 65 Olds Cutlass, torched it out of that car, bolted it to the motor mounts, and set that thing in this frame back in 1980 when I was just a kid. And I burnt in about two 8-inch welds right on top of this frame. Cheesy. It worked, but it was cheesy. The 330 Olds I was running was so low, it was literally pounding my tie rod every time I hit a bump. The kingpins were probably the worst thing that was ever happening to my 46. They were so loose. It was ridiculous. I could take my tire and move it back and forth. It was probably a quarter or a half. It was horrible. It sounds like an exaggeration, but like it was a lot. It was so bad. When Napa rebuilt this axle, they said that it was getting into the other fit where it was beyond the bushing. It cost me $100 back in the 80s. Seemed like a lot of money. It was a lot of money to me. Despite all of its mechanical problems, I drove it hard. One Saturday after work, I was driving home. My buddies and I would meet down at the fishing hole. I had a buddy, big kid. Kenny Rogers was his name. He had a car we called Belchfire. It was a 72 LTD he got from his grandma. I'm heading down to the fishing hole. It's a greasy little mud trail. And I am throwing rooster tail everywhere. I don't know how high it was going, but I was ripping down this little trail. It's a swamp area almost. And I'm going way too fast. I get close. It's kind of downhill and I cannot stop. It is nothing but snot. I lock up the brakes and I'm sliding what seems like forever. I end up running into Kenny's car. Didn't hurt that bumper at all. Messed up my truck. Buckled the fender, buckled the hood. It was embarrassing. Pounded it out, but it was never the same and I wanted to park it. So I was in the search for another car so I could fix this old girl. And I'll tell you, the reason why I never got rid of this thing, is my dad, when I was growing up, says, I wish I would have never gotten rid of my Model A. I wish I would have never sold my 55. When I was 12, 13, 14 years old, there was two things that were on my mind as far as my first rig. One, it had to be cool. And two, I was never going to sell it. When I parked it in 83, it was like stock height, flatbed. It was 6'4" at the top of the cab. 1984, I stumbled across a 69 Impala four-door hardtop. It was a wore-out car, but for $50, I figured, you know, I get that thing running, drive it. 6 months later, my old truck's back on the road. It only needed 6 things. Not a problem. Well, I got in trouble with the law, lost my driver's license, had to move someplace else, start over in life, and started a family. Hey, what better thing to do when you're trying to get yourself back on your feet? This old girl here was on the back shelf. Starting in 1987, in 2 years, I completely restored that Impala before this thing even had 1 ounce of attention. And I knew I wanted the height lower and lower and lower and lower. I didn't know what the end result was, but in my mind, I knew I wanted a street rod truck. As soon as that Impala was on the road, it was time for this girl here. I had been drawing pictures of this thing for like 5 years. I wanted something low and chopped, channeled. This thing was going to be entirely different. In '89, I started cutting it apart. I was working for Duckworth Boats at the time. I had already convinced my boss to let me do all the paint and upholstery there, you know, after hours using the facility. So it seemed natural that after the Impala was done, that I would work on this girl. So I towed it over to Duckworth Boat Company. The first thing I did was put a rear cross member in it, tied that together, and then I boxed in the front and put a cross member in the front. That allowed me to open up the entire middle of the frame, and then I boxed it all in. There must have been 90 holes on each frame rail that I had to weld up, all of those being rivet holes. So after I had boxed in the frame, then I flipped it upside down and I built this stuff here. This is all back in 1989. The guy that mentored me on canvas down at Duckworth is an old man, Bob Crocker. He passed like 30 years ago. He had a lathe and he allowed me to use it. And I built these bushings 35 years ago out of graphite impregnated Teflon. Not quite sure if they're going to work, but I'm going to give it a try. So inside of this frame is a cylinder that I welded into it. Basically holds these bushings. And I got bushings here and there and over here in the springs. My goal was to get this thing as low as possible. After I got done working that suspension and bringing it up closer to the frame, it essentially lowered the frame about 2 inches, maybe in the front, probably a little more than 3 inches in back. I didn't quite get the same results in the front because the shackles were a lot shorter. It dropped the frame down. That was lowering the whole height. I wanted to get the body lower. Channeling is an old school trick. Basically, you cut the floor out of it and then you drop it down 2, 3, 4 inches. This one here, I went 4. As you can tell by the vintage pictures, I actually cut the bottom of this floor out. I made a set of channels and I put the channels on top of the frame and I just dropped the body 4 inches. There's 1,000 ways of doing it. What I did was I built channels. With the 2 inches or 3 inches I got from the chassis, 4 inches from the channel, I knew I needed to come down more. So I ended up lobbing 4 inches off the top with what they call a chop, right? What I needed now was another cab because all my research when I was working at the gas station said the best thing to have is 2 cabs. Back then, these things were not worth hardly anything. And so my dad had been working for Johnny Lober over in Connell for eons, every summer during wheat harvest. And there was an old truck in the boneyard, and it was a 41, 42, 46, whatever truck. Big farm truck, and it had just the right stuff. We picked the cab off of that old Art Deco truck with another Art Deco truck, which was an Army issue 6-tired four-wheel drive boom truck. And that gave me all the sheet metal I needed to butcher this old girl. So, at this time, it's got a chopped top, channeled body, sucked in suspension that's dropped down probably 10 or 11 inches. This is the point of the story that gets a little bit dark, but life takes us to an unexpected twist. I went through a divorce. My doggone little 46 Chevy truck, it took a total backseat. I needed a vehicle. The Impala was the only thing on the road, and this old girl here was completely tore down. And with a chopped top, channeled body, all that sort of junk I'd been doing to it, there was no way this was going to get running in a week or two. I was scrambling. All I had was a freaking 10-speed, and I was borrowing that from my ex-wife. So after borrowing a couple vehicles from my dad for a few months, I ended up buying a 66 Power Wagon. That truck was the biggest maintenance eater I've ever owned in my entire life. It had a 396 big block in it that was set up all at the wrong angles, and I was eating U-joints. Lesson learned. That was in the late 80s, and I don't think I bought a project from somebody else since then. No thank you. That thing was a nightmare. So I knew I wanted to punt that Power Wagon, and I wanted to get back to Chevy. Something that was all bone stock. And I've been researching 67 to 72s. There was one right across the street. It was everything I ever needed. Long box, 307, turbo 400, running truck, 800 bucks. Perfect. That Power Wagon, it ate my lunch for 3 freaking years. I couldn't work on this. I was dreaming about this girl the whole time I was driving that old full drive. But once I got my 68 Chevy truck on the road, I was able to work on this old girl. After I decided to sell the Power Wagon, I knew I wanted to take the money and pour some concrete. Once this shop had a roof on it, I was bringing my 46 home. This girl had been up at my dad's. I parked it up there. It was safe and sound. Didn't even see the light of day, but I wanted it home. I wanted to work on it. The first time it took 5 years. Nothing was done to it. Then I worked on it for 6 months. Then another 5 years. Then I got it home. Guess what? You know what this dude does? He draws pictures. You know, I think I'm probably my worst enemy. Every time I think I'm getting closer to getting something done or getting back to it, I end up drawing a bunch of stinking pictures. And then the next thing you want to do is this top. It has to be a roadster. So I end up taking it off right across here and, I don't know, wherever in here, and I ended up taking it and turning it into a roadster. How stupid is that? But again, it's all driven by pictures in my mind. I'm drawing this stuff down. I had safety meetings, I had idle time at night, whatever it was outside of my 40-hour work week, I had time on my hands, and I like to doodle. And in my crazy mind, I had these hopes and dreams of something very, very cool. I wanted it to be distinctively 46, but I cut it and cut it and cut it on paper. So the next thing I wanted to do was shorten the wheelbase, because hey, a Corvette's got like a 96-inch wheelbase. Why wouldn't this? I ended up cutting the thing probably 16 inches. Basically, I took the back of the frame and I cut it off, and I wanted to go forward where it's a tapered frame. When the frame is tapered, that means you got to narrow the back part of it. I'm doing all of this insanity on sawhorses. There's no way to keep it straight on a sawhorse, but that's what this young guy did because, well, I really didn't know what I was doing. This thing was lower and lower and lower, and it was shorter, and it didn't have a top. It ended up being a roadster. All these wonderful things. And then I had this epiphany. Back when I was in high school, I was living up the grade, overlooking the fairgrounds. Way up the canyon was a 41, 46, 39, I don't know. I can't remember what the dash looked like, but it had this Art Deco look to it. It was a Suburban. The thing had windows. The thing was completely full of bullet holes. And it had no frame, no doors. It had nothing. I remember it in 78, 79 when I lived in that area. So fast forward 15 years. I get permission to hike up that canyon, and sure enough, it's still there. Nobody wants it. So my buddy Brian Neely and I, we head up this little draw, and we get this thing on the back of my truck somehow, some way. I don't remember. I may have to talk to him about it. He's probably got a better memory than I do. I wanted that Suburban sheet metal. We get this old girl strapped down. All it is a body from here to the tailgate. that Suburban sheet metal was going to make that super cool cameo style 46. Can you envision a 46 Chevy pickup about 10 inches lower, roadster top, and it's got the same contour here back there, but it was either going to be smooth side like it takes off from here, or it was going to go around a little bit and back. I didn't know if I was going to wrap it around the cab or not. Those are the sort of things that was going through my mind in 1993, 94. There is a lot of storyline behind this little girl because it's going on 50 years. I have drawn, cut, put away, got it back out, drawn, cut, put away. I don't know how many times. In 94, it was sitting on a box frame with a channel body and a chop top that had been turned into a roadster, and I was getting ready to tilt the front end, and it was not low enough in the front. So what I did was I ended up cutting it right down that line right there. And I Z'd this 6 inches. It's a pretty common thing in the rat rod. I did this like 30 years ago. The idea was to get this part lower, because remember this here, when I pulled this up, it didn't come up near as much as the back. So I dropped the back, whatever it was, 3-4 inches. I only got about 2 inches out of the front. And so it was sitting fairly level, and I wanted the front dropped. So once I dropped the front, that's what I decided to take, 2 1/4 inches out of the side. Basically, the 2 1/4 comes from sectioning the grill. The grill bars from top of one to top of the next is 2 1/4. The reason why I did that is my fenders were touching the tires, and I had to do something. I was planning on doing a tilt nose. I had wanted a tilt nose for a long time, so I figured sectioning it, it's really not that big a deal. It just mattered welding the hood together and cutting the hood sides out and taking about 2 1/4 out. Put all that together to relieve the problem with the clearance of the wheels. So after the section was done on the front clip and it was all tacked together, I had a moment to roll the thing outside. It was shorter, it was lower, it was a roadster, it was chopped, all that fun stuff. And I'm looking at it, and I knew I wanted to do something different with the headlights. That's when my little boy gave me a brilliant idea. We had been at a car show recently, and he was like, remember that one car? You should make headlights like that one car. And he's just a little tight. I don't know how old he must have been. Let's see, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He was describing a 53 to 55 Corvette headlight. He thought that was the coolest thing, and so do I, actually. But he says, you should put headlights like that one car. And so then when I figured out what he was talking about, I was like, that's a great idea. Instead of being subtle, I wanted to push these headlights back 7 inches. 7 inches, that's a lot. I mean, just push that sucker back. Once I sectioned it, then I had a radiator issue because my old radiator would not fit right here. So I decided to take one of my leftover 69 Impala radiators and put it in this area and lean it back like you would on a Corvette. Seemed logical to me, and that is where the whole project ended up taking a real twist and turn again, because I knew that it was never going to handle and it was never going to be what I wanted unless I essentially started over. This frame right here ended up in the corner and ended up having about 2 other bodies on it, and back to this eventually. I know it sounds like insanity, but that's what happens when you draw pictures before you have the money and you can't stick with one plan. That's my problem. But I've grown out of all of that. Well, maybe not. As you can see, I've been working on this old girl a while now, probably 3 years on and off, trying to put her back together. I have been undoing all of the junk that I did to this in 1980, in 1989, and in 1995 and 6. After 95, 96, it went down this other path, and so there's another vehicle that's basically the blood sister to this girl here. Most of the parts that were discarded, I kept because, you know, that's just kind of my character. I probably had 1,500 pounds worth of parts of my original truck. Got my original frame, springs, front axle, grill, wheels, transmission. There's a lot that I have that I never got rid of. And it's been a blast putting this old girl back together the way I envisioned it when I was a kid. That's why I'm putting this thing back together, because why not? Pushing about 4 years ago, I had this idea about drawing a picture back the way it was 40 plus years ago. And my wife is saying, what are you doing? I just wanted to draw a picture of my truck the way it was, because back then I couldn't draw pictures the way I do now. I've learned some techniques on drawing. She made this statement, bless her heart, that, well, it's really too bad you butchered that truck because it's really cute. She thought it was, just a shame. And I agree, because actually I got this hot rod friend that I see once in a while at the car shows, Jay Byers, and he's basically my age, and he still has his 57 Ford pickup that he had in high school. It is essentially the same truck. It is absolutely a time capsule. In a good way, I envy him. In a good way, I am so jealous. Hindsight, if I could go back in time and talk to me as an old guy to a young guy, I would say, park the thing in October and work on it with whatever money you got and whatever time you got, and get it back on the road. Have a separate vehicle to drive the snot out of back and forth to work. Drive your truck. If you need to fix something, fix it. If you can wait till wintertime, wait till wintertime. But don't cut it up. But obviously, I cannot back up that clock. There's no time machines out there. So this is the best I can do, is to put back together my high school rig with a different cab. This is off of a 1.5 ton truck. So the cab mounts are all different. But I took care of all that. That's in episode like 16 or some crazy thing. This is not the way it was when I was 18 years old on a whim in the summertime doing a V8 conversion with very little help. Next up in this 46 saga of 2 trucks, I'm going to tell the story of how I built a space frame in this little shop right here on a plywood jig. It was actually fairly successful. I am not going to undo anything that I did 30 years ago. I did it right enough that I believe it's going to work just fine. I've got enough content on this crazy story to last probably 15 or 20 episodes. So if you like this sort of garbage, just hang with me and I'll try to get you this story. Maybe it'll be an inspiration one way or another on your 46 project. Until then, God bless. And thanks for watching Jester's Garage.